Webinar on youth in the workforce. I'm Katie Sieverding, Government Relations Coordinator for the South Dakota Retailers Association. First, before we get started, I have a little bit of information about our association. The South Dakota Retailers is a 3,900 member statewide association. Our primary mission is to represent retailers in the legislative and regulatory process. We also provide information, offer training for food service and alcohol licensees, and provide member services. Those include credit card processing, business insurance, and data security. As part of our service, we have an agreement with a labor law firm that allows our members to get answers to employment law questions from an attorney. For more information, check out our website at www.sdra.org. Today's webinar will feature a presentation by Marcia Hultman, the Secretary of the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation. She has been part of the DLR team since June of 1997, first serving as Public Information Officer, then Workforce Services Director in 2000, and a joint role as Director and Deputy Secretary starting in 2006. Secretary Hultman chairs the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council and serves on the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council, Workforce Development Council, and the DOL Retirement Board. Just a few things before we start the presentation. We have a note-taking version of the PowerPoint that can be printed from the handouts area on the side of your screen. All the phones of attendees are muted, so we won't be hearing background noises. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. If you would like to ask a question at any time, just go to the panel on the side of your screen, type in your message in the chat box, and click on send. To see that chat box, you may need to click on the orange arrow to maximize the panel. At the conclusion of the presentation, I'll read the questions out loud and Secretary Hultman will provide the answers. I'll now turn it over to Secretary Hultman.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Katie. Thank you to the Retailers Association for this opportunity to visit with you today about youth in the workplace. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, have had an opportunity to speak to about 45 different groups in the last year and reach out to about 1,500 South Dakotans on this topic. So look forward to now this opportunity and the recording of this webinar to continue to share this message and hopefully provide some answers to some questions that you have provided in advance. So with that, I want to start today by visiting with you about just our workforce landscape in general before I get to the specifics on youth. One of the common things that we hear in traveling throughout the state, the governor hears it, I hear it, the Governor's Office of Economic Development hears it, is that our workers, our employers are really facing a challenge right now, and I like to qualify it as one of the best challenges we could possibly have. Our businesses are poised for growth and expansion, but at the same time, they're having a challenge finding the skilled workers that they need. And we hear that constantly, so what we've done is look at some of the data that supports that, and the data definitely verifies what employers are telling us. The number one thing that I point to is our unemployment rate. South Dakota traditionally has a very low unemployment rate, and that continues to be true today. We have a current unemployment rate of 2.9%, and when we reach 3% unemployment rate, that's considered to be almost full employment, meaning that everybody that's really ready, has the right skill sets, is already engaged in the workforce. So we're slightly below that. I do always like to take the opportunity to quickly define what the unemployment rate actually measures. In my world, I have a tendency to oversimplify things. And I actually heard recently that Elon Musk has said that that's a skill that we're going to really need in the future, that we need to take everything to the simplest terms and then build from there when finding solutions. So I wanted to pat myself on the back that it's not just because I'm simple that I need things in simplest terms. But with that, I want to explain the unemployment rate, and my oversimplification is either you have a job or you don't have a job. That seems pretty clear. And if I take that correlation one step further, that I would seem to think would mean you're either employed or unemployed. And then taking that just one step further, I would think, in my simple explanation, that the unemployment rate measures everybody that's unemployed, correlating back to not having a job. However, that's not true. What the unemployment rate actually measures is an individual who is willing and seeking and available for work and has done so in the last 4 weeks. So to be counted in that unemployment rate, you have to have been looking actively for work in the last 4 weeks. So definitely changes that definition. It does not include everybody that is not engaged in the workforce. And I think that's important for us to remember that, what that actually measures. And that's not just a South Dakota methodology that we made up on who we wanted to count. That's the methodology that's used across the country. So we are comparing similar things from state to state. Another number that I find fascinating, and this is a real-time number. We invested in a very sophisticated system for posting jobs and seeking jobs, which I'm going to get to a little bit later in the presentation this morning. And because of that system, I'm able to tell you that yesterday we had 17,225 job openings in South Dakota. And that number is real-time data. So every time a job drops off, is filled, an employer decides they're not going to post it any longer, then that number changes. Every time new jobs are listed, that number changes. So if I were to go out and look today, my assumption is that that number would not be exactly as it was yesterday. So when we really begin to illustrate what's happening in our job market, it's when we compare within a month the number of unemployed, based on that definition I gave you previously, to the number of job openings we have. And this really solidifies the challenge, or exemplifies the challenge that employers are facing. Right now, we have about a third of a person for every job opening, or 3 jobs per person. And that illustrates why it's so challenging when we have openings to find individuals, not only to just have applicants in general, but to have applicants with the right skill sets that we're seeking at the right time. Another thing that illustrates a positive about South Dakota, but also underlies why we have challenges filling our positions, is South Dakotans are worker bees. Our South Dakota labor force participation rate is 67.9%, and that is measuring everybody age 16, basically until death, how many of them are in the workforce. So age 16 on, 67.9% of us are in the workforce, and we're ranked 9th highest in the nation. So we're doing a pretty good job of engaging a majority of our citizens in the workforce. And that becomes important later as we talk about where do we find employees. The other thing that's really interesting about South Dakota, and it doesn't surprise me knowing our work ethic, but South Dakota is #1 in the nation for multiple job holders. We currently have 8.5% of our citizens who have more than one job. And that kind of surprised me. I actually thought it might be even higher, but the fact that the national average is 4.5% shows that, or excuse me, 4.9%, but that shows that we are well above the rest of the nation in our multiple job holders. And if we were face-to-face this morning, I would ask you for your input, why do you think that we maybe have more multiple job holders? And the answers that I typically get are things like money, that just to meet the needs or the demands of a family situation, people might have to have more than one job. That is one of the reasons, but there are other reasons that people in South Dakota have more than one job as well. Part of that is because we're worker bees, because a lot of our communities are small, rural communities, and we have such a strong work ethic, oftentimes we'll step up and do the job just because it needs to be done. One of my favorite stories is about a cook at an Avera assisted living center, and this is in a very small rural community. And this cook, who provides food for all the residents at the assisted living, is 85 years old. And the reason that she's 85 years old and still showing up for work every day, I always say she could live there and just have a short commute, but she sees a job in her community that needs to be done and there's nobody else to do it, so she's stepping up and filling that position. And that's just who we are and how we operate. And then another reason that many people today have multiple jobs is maybe what I call your real job doesn't fulfill some of your personal aspirations or your creative side or a passion. So a lot of times individuals will have a second job just because it's an area of interest for them and it allows them to pursue a passion or a hobby. So it's definitely not a negative that there are many multiple job holders in South Dakota. Now, where do I get all my information? If you don't remember anything else from today, I hope that the sdjobs.org is something that you'll jot down, because this website really is an important part of doing business in South Dakota. And I alluded to the system that we created, and I guess it's been over a year now since it went live, but this is how you can access that very robust system. And you can see just in looking at what's on your screen in front of you, if you're a business and you want to find workers, you can post your jobs. We can do that for you, but you can do it yourself from your place of business or at home in the evening from your personal computer. Individuals can find a job quickly and easily by clicking on that link. You can access all the openings right now in South Dakota. And as you can see, the Department of Labor is very large and very diverse. We have many different things that you can access, information, links to forms, reports from our licensing boards and commissions, all of that accessible from this one website. So again, stressing how important that URL is. But for my purposes today, I've circled in red the link that if you're interested in labor market information relevant to your area or to your business or your occupation, just click on that icon that I've circled in red. And that will take you to the next page, and unfortunately you have to click one more time, but then you're there. This is all the different type of workers, labor market related information that we have, but the link that I've again outlined in red, the Virtual Labor Market Data System, allows you a window and easy access to a wealth of the information and data that we collect. So by clicking there, you're going to end up on the page that you see in front of you. And I'm going to give you just a second to look at some of the types of information that is available on this page. Now, I have customized my page when I did the screenshot to statewide data, but you can do this by county or you can do it by MSA. And that allows you to really drill down and see what's going on, not just in South Dakota in its entirety, but what's going on in your local communities. So again, you can see what that employment rate is quickly by just going to this page. You could see what that employment rate is in any county in the state, and it's going to vary from county to county. You can see information on training providers. We've got information on occupations and job openings and where some of our largest numbers are. You can find wage information, and that's really important as an employer for you to know what the average wages are in your occupation. Are you paying a wage that is competitive? And just exactly how does that shake out, not just in your community, but across the state. So again, one of the most important things that we can do as employers and business people is to be informed on what the labor market is in general. And we could do a seminar just on this page itself and all the different ways that you can customize. But for today's purposes, I just wanted you to be aware that it is a really valuable resource. So with that, I want to get in more specifically to the numbers. All of our workforce challenges really come down to fairly simple numbers. And in South Dakota, there aren't a lot of us. If you look at our population, I think our overall population now is somewhere around 800,000. But if you look at those that have fewer restrictions on their opportunities to work, that's our population 16 years and plus. And you can see that number. There are 673,000 of us. And I mentioned earlier that in that overall age group, 67.9% of us are in the workforce. So we've just got two columns there. It's pretty straightforward. You can see for each age group breakdown how many people are in the labor force and how many people are not in the labor force. So I think that's important for us to consider. Where are we focusing our attention? Where are we recruiting from? Who are we marketing to? Where should our training dollars be spent? Do we focus on those that are already in the workforce, or do we focus on those that aren't in the workforce and try to engage them? So you can see the area that I have double stressed there with yellow and then a red border. And that's the group that I would consider pretty much the primary working age, when we expect that people are finishing their education, are engaged actively in the workforce until they reach retirement age. And if I average all of those in yellow together, 83.8% of us are in the workforce in that age group. So again, we're doing very well. That doesn't mean that there aren't underemployed or people that aren't looking for new opportunities or people that are maybe lacking skill sets to advance. So we still need to focus on that group and help them achieve everything they can possibly achieve. But we need to also recognize, and that's one of our challenges, that they are already engaged in the workforce. So, you know, we get to 60, 64 years, and that number is decreasing as far as participation, which we'd anticipate. Get to retirement age traditionally at 65, and again, that participation rate goes down even more. And then look at though, 75 years and over, and there's still almost 9% of us that are actively engaged in the workforce for one reason or another. The purpose of today's presentation is not to focus on retirees, but I will tell you there are a lot of similarities between hiring and having retirees actively engaged in the workforce, and it's a really great pool of individuals to look at when trying to meet our workforce demands, because they have a work history, they have experiences, they have knowledge, but you're going to have to, the one thing that's consistent with them that I'm going to stress over and over again about youth is they require flexibility. So again, I'm not going to dwell on them too much because they're not our primary focus, but don't count them out when you're recruiting and looking for individuals to help meet your workforce needs. So let's finally, you're probably thinking, is she ever going to get there, talk about youth and why it's so important that we focus on youth and engage youth in our workforce. On this slide, you can see we've defined youth as those 16 to 19 years old, and we actually don't have data for 14 and 15-year-olds, so I'm sure that the number would be much lower. But with the 16 to 19-year-olds, you can see a somewhat alarming trend in the United States as well as South Dakota. And that trend is showing a big decrease in the number of youth that are participating in the workforce. Nationwide, that's dropped from 45% to 38%. And in South Dakota, it's dropped, and actually, I think that might be incorrect because we've had a 10% decrease. So it must be from 56%, I apologize, to 43.2% in South Dakota. And with that, we still have one of the higher youth participation rates in the nation, but we're seeing that same trend that our rates have dropped by about 10% in South Dakota, consistent with what the nation is seeing. And there are many reasons that it's important to focus on this and to think about this. One is, if I were to ask each of you on the call today, you know, at what age did you have your first job? The typical answer that I get when speaking to adults across South Dakota is they had their first job when they were 14 years old. And I also like to ask, what types of things did you learn on that first job? And answers are typically, you know, respect for my boss, showing up on time, contacting somebody to tell them that I'm not going to be able to work my shift, finding somebody to work my shift for me if that's company policy, how to play nice with others, how to get along. All those skills that we learn in those first jobs, all those kids that aren't in the workforce anymore are not learning. And we're seeing that on a daily basis when we're hiring young adults. Another important thing about engaging youth when they're young is not just learning those soft skills, but it also helps frame our point of reference for what we want to be when we quote unquote grow up. So if we look at that decline that we're seeing not just in the nation, but also in South Dakota, we kind of have to look at what's causing that. And the bottom line is, I think, for why kids are not participating in the workforce at the level that they used to, is they're just so busy. And think about the kids that you may know, the kids that you follow that are maybe your parents or grandparents or an aunt and uncle of. And sports, for instance, there used to be a season, but now if you're engaged in almost any sport, be it soccer or hockey or baseball, kids are competing year-round. And if they're not competing in the off-season, they're probably engaged in training and camps. Everything from academics are much more rigorous. Kids are taking college-level classes when they're in high school, and they're completing college credits when they're in high school, but that also means that things are a little bit harder for them, and they have less time to maybe be engaged in the workforce. And none of those are bad things. They're just realities. So I'm not making a judgment on youth activities, and definitely not on our education system, but as employers, we have to realize something that I call the new math. And people don't get very excited about this, but the new math is, it may well take 3 kids to fill 1 position. And I know that's 3 times the headache, it's 3 times the HR paperwork, it's 3 times the scheduling hassle, but it's the reality that we face, and it's so important to have those kids in the workforce that I think it's worth taking that challenge head on. And I think the other thing that you'll find, if you take the risk on those really busy kids, they're actually the kids that you want to have in your workplace. They're team leaders, they're captains, they're good academics, they're in band, they're in 4-H, they're engaged in their communities, they're doing community service, and they're going to take all that energy that they put forth to everything else and also apply that in the workplace. I think the same rule that applies to kids applies to retirees. You have to have that same flexibility, and it may take 3 retirees to fill 1 position, but again, I think it's worth it. So with that, we have about 34,000 kids aged 16 to 24 who are not in the workforce. And just think, if we could engage majority of those kids, how far that would go to meet some of those workforce challenges and workforce demands that we have. The other important reason is the earlier that we engage kids in the workforce is it helps to form ties and help retain them in our communities. So that's gonna be kind of a common theme that I'll be reinforcing throughout. This next slide is what I call the "we got what we wanted" kind of slide. And it shows a really interesting national trend that is consistent in South Dakota as well. What the blue line shows you is recent high school graduates enrolled in college. And we all want our kids to do better than we did and maybe have a better lifestyle, and we're encouraging individuals to go to post-secondary education, and we've seen that blue line increase dramatically. At the same time, we've seen the teen participation rate in the workforce decrease dramatically, and we start to have that big gap. And it is not uncommon. I know kids that are graduating from college that have never had a job. And just think, if you're hiring a young adult, maybe a high school graduate, maybe a college graduate, and they present themselves as a young adult and they appear to be a young adult and you hire them, but they haven't had those experiences of a first job, that on-the-job learning experience, and you're assuming they have certain skill sets and they don't. And it's very frustrating for the youth, and it's very frustrating for the employer, but we really can't expect them to know things that they haven't been exposed to. So again, I know you're all interested in how you can engage them in the workforce, and I support you 100% in that, because it's so important that teens have that work experience. So while many of our youth are going on to education, it's important to look at what actually happens along the way. And this is a slide that the governor actually has used in many presentations, and I think it really illustrates the contention I made in the previous slide, that so many of them are going to post-secondary training, but what really happens. So to keep the math simple, if we have 100 students that start high school, 77% of those statewide are actually going to graduate from high school. And I think that number is a little bit low. I believe that DOE has updated that number and we're doing better in our graduation rate. But regardless, there's a handful of kids that don't finish high school, and they're most likely still in our communities, and it's very important that we catch those kids and try to help them get the skill sets that they need to be successful and contributing members. So of those 77 that do graduate from high school, 52 of them enroll in college. And by college, I'm defining that as post-secondary training. So it might be a technical school, it might be a four-year traditional university setting. Here's where the numbers start to get a little bit more concerning. 32 of those kids return for a second year. So along the line, we've lost 23 kids, we've lost 25 kids, and we've lost another 20 kids. Where are they, and what are they doing, and what are their long-term plans, and how can we help them be successful? And of those 100 that started high school that actually go on to complete a degree in 4 to 5 years, 23 of them. So that early number, that blue line that shows that sharp increase, it's important that more are going to school, but it's equally or more important perhaps that they're successfully completing school. And there's a whole host of reasons that individuals might not finish on a traditional track. And what we need to do though, the individuals, the 77 that somewhere along the line are taking a different route, are really key to our workforce challenge answers and solutions. Because if we can engage with them and get them some type of skill training and get them involved in the workforce in a meaningful way, then we're all going to be more successful. So what's a business to do? Well, the most important thing is to connect, and you're probably thinking that, yes, I'm stating the obvious, like I have a tendency to do. And the big question is then, how do we connect with these youth, with those individuals that are not engaged in the workforce? Some suggestions, and this is a list kind of in order of the least complex and least expensive for a business to engage in to ones that become more resource expensive and financially more expensive on the bottom of the list. So first of all, these are just ways that you can connect, and a lot of these probably aren't new concepts to you, and it'll be really important for me though to fill in the blank on how that connection can actually happen, which I'll do momentarily. So where are the kids and how do we reach them is a really hard question, and we struggle with it too, because a lot of times our youth aren't desperate yet or don't see the needs yet for further education and training, or don't see, if they're still in high school, the relevance of what they're doing in high school as it relates to their future. So the more we can engage with them as adults in different settings in the business world and the educational world, the more we're going to be able to reinforce the opportunities and what they need to do to get there. So these are different things that a business can do in partnership with the Department of Labor and Regulation, in partnership with schools to engage with youth. An exploratory interview is as simple as saying, yes, I'm available. If a student wants to come and talk to me about what it means to work in my business, to be involved in my industry, I'm more than happy to sit down, take them out to lunch, have a casual conversation with them, and talk to them about my business or industry. Open house events are really crucial for communities to let students know what opportunities are available in their community. A lot of this we hear in the manufacturing world, but I think it's relevant to all businesses, is the perception of what goes on in a business is much different than the reality of what goes on in a business. So if you're interested in hosting an open house event to let people really know the work that is done in the work environment, don't do it just for students. Do it for teachers, students, and parents. Teachers are key because they spend such a large percentage of their time with students, who in turn are spending a huge percentage of their time with teachers. And if teachers don't know what is available in their communities, there's no way they can advocate for the training necessary to be successful in those industries. I think we all know what a traditional job fair is. We've started to do them at high schools around the state. Again, we like to invite parents to those job fairs as they too need to see the opportunities that their students are having available. A job shadow is a little bit more structured. It allows a student to spend some time with individuals at your business, seeing what a day is really like, and walking around with one or two people, and that could be for a couple hours a day. It could be for a week. You could spread it out over a period of time, but again, not quite as much structure. Mentoring is helping the student with not just what their future is, but maybe dealing with some of the social and emotional things that are going on in their lives, just being an adult that's there for them to share concerns, to help them academically, but then definitely with that business and future and education slant engaged. Work experiences and internships are things that are used interchangeably, and when you get to this stage, we actually have money available in the department that if an individual student qualifies, we can help offset some of their wages while they're doing a work experience or internship with you, taking some of the risk out of it for the employer. And we can do the same for on-the-job training. On-the-job training is a little bit different from the work experience in that it's very specific to that occupation, and the individual will be learning skills they're going to need specific to that occupation. When I say apprenticeship, I actually mean a registered apprenticeship with the Federal Department of Labor. And again, it's a little bit more of a complicated process, but it definitely has relevance in all industry sectors. And we'll be hearing more about that in a minute. And then kind of at the tip of that iceberg, hopefully you're all familiar with the Build Dakota Scholarship Program, and there's a way for businesses to engage in that. You can help offset the cost of a student attending a state technical school, and then there's a guarantee at the end of that, or a commitment that the student makes to return and work for your business for X amount of time in exchange for that financial support. And then they can also access the dollars available through that scholarship fund. So a business can pay for either all of the education or a portion of that education and spread those state dollars that we have a little bit further. So again, this is just a list in general of different things that you can do to connect with students while they're still in high school. So before I get to that, key point, how do I really make that connection? I do want to talk a little bit about some certainties when dealing with youth. And that first certainty is, we raised them. And therefore, I think we need to not spend too much time. It's pretty normal from generation to generation for the older generation to lament a little bit about the generation coming up. But it is what it is, and they are who we raised, and how do we deal with them in the workplace? So with that, I would say flexibility is key. And that means flexibility with scheduling. It means flexibility with accepting that they might be a hockey player and need to be at practice at a certain time, but that they're going to show up every day that they're scheduled, and they're going to be committed to your place of employment. Again, reiterate that busy kids are often the kids that we want. They're the ones that are going to be really good future employees and leaders. And it's that new math again. I might have to have 3 of them to equal 1. But in the long run, if they work for me for 3 years and come back during summers when they're in college and maybe ultimately come back and work for me full time, it's definitely worth that upfront initial headache of dealing with 3 times the HR issues. Social media, I know, no big surprise to any of us. It's where they live. It's where we find them. So whenever we're promoting opportunities, showcasing successes, praising kids for a job well done on the work site, social media is a great place to do that. And they really like that recognition, and they like that environment. My son had a job. His first job was at a pizza place, and they did all their scheduling by text. And it was great. The kids had no excuse. I didn't read the calendar. I didn't go to the website. They're all on text all the time, and that employer was in tune to that, and that's how they communicated all their scheduling, and it worked out great. I've stated this a little bit before, but we have to train for soft skills. We can't assume that kids are coming with any of those soft skills, that they're maybe not having those experiences. That's what first jobs are all about. And employers are educators. And our responsibility as an employer/educator is to model good behaviors and to have really thought out plans for training those behaviors. Really important to have reasonable expectations and to be very clear in those expectations for kids. And as I was typing these, I thought, well, that's pretty obvious. These apply not just to youth as employees, they apply to all our employees. But I think we have to take that even a step further when we have kids in the workplace, that they just don't know what our expectations are. And if we don't express them, there's no way they're going to learn. I always use personal examples, but my same son is interning now this summer at the Department of Transportation. And he texted me one day and he said, Mom, I've completed all my work and I don't want to bug anybody. What should I do? And my response to him was, definitely bug somebody. They'll appreciate your initiative. They'll appreciate the fact that you're acknowledging that you're done and you're ready to take on a new project. But without somebody to tell him that specifically, he may or may not have figured that out as quickly on his own. So never assume that they have those natural inclinations to meet our expectations that we have for them. So clearly defined just goes hand in hand in that. And then again, just that reminder that there's going to be some frustrations, there's going to be some things you're just going to shake your head and wonder how in the world could they have made that mistake, or thought it was okay to text me at midnight and say they're not coming the next day. Well, if we don't tell them and if we don't clearly define that, there really isn't a way for them to know that. So to answer some of those things that are certainties on the employer side, the soft skills, when I'm talking to employers, they often say our employees, especially youth, are lacking soft skills. But then it's really hard to define exactly what a soft skill is. And so we have worked very hard to define that, and we've actually purchased as the department a curriculum to help teach those soft skills. So these are the kind of things that you're going to learn naturally in a first job, but we also have a curriculum to reinforce that and support that. So you can see all these things that you would probably love to have all of your employees know at any age, at any point in their career. To have good attendance, appearance, attitude, ambition, accountability, acceptance, and appreciation. And so what we have to offer to you, and this is a concrete thing that you can do, the Department of Labor has purchased this curriculum, and you can send any of your employees to take part in this training. And it's designed to be an 8-hour training, and we can break that up. We can do it all in one day. We can do 2 4-hour sessions. Obviously you can do the math. We could do 8 1-hour sessions. But it does need to be a group, but it could be a group of 2 of your employees and then employees from other businesses. But the deal that I would like to offer to you is if you have new employees or existing employees that are struggling with some of these behaviors, send them to us and we pay for the training. You pay for their wages for those 8 hours that they're taking part in the training. But we think that these skills are so important, and we've heard such a demand for these skills from employers that we're willing to make that investment. So again, maybe you have a brand new employee, it could be a youth, it could be an adult, and maybe their first week on the job is learning the ins and outs of the business and how to do payroll and how to log their time and where the water cooler is and what their responsibilities are. But maybe you take a few hours out of that first week to send them to this training, so they're also getting some reinforcement on these very foundational skills that they're going to need to be successful. I personally think it's a great upfront investment in employees. We are offering it to individuals that we work with in an attempt to get them job ready if they've not had any job experience. And again, you can also have an employee that's been there for years and maybe needs some training, and we'd be happy to work with them as well. So please keep that in mind to help fill that void. I want to touch on now some state programs that we have, and we need your help, but I think these are where you're going to really find the answer to some of the questions that you had submitted earlier, and provide that really concrete way of how you can connect with youth in your local communities. So one of the main things that we've been working on since last December is Career Launch. And Career Launch is our attempt to connect students with businesses in local communities so they can have those work-based learning experiences, do career exploration, and gain access to the services that the Department of Labor has. We had 4 pilot communities, Rapid City, Brookings, Yankton, and Sioux Falls, and this is brand new. It all came together fairly rapidly, which is not how state government always works, but we hired individuals last December, and in January, they were in the schools doing this work. So again, we just have 1 semester under our belt in those communities, and we've had great success that I'll talk about in a minute. But we are expanding. Our Department of Labor and Regulation local offices have staff that can help with these services, and we're expanding our Career Launch career advisors. West River, we're going to have a regional approach and be covering communities large and small, and then we're also expanding to Watertown and Pierre in this coming school year. But no matter what community you're in, the Department of Labor can help you with similar services. Again, why is this so important? What we found was, go back to that slide, and students were not making informed decisions about their educational path, which results in many of them not completing their educational path. So we're hoping if we can catch them earlier, do some intervention and some coaching and some counseling and some work-based experiences at the beginning, that their future educational endeavors will be more successful. So to access Career Launch, and this is the second big takeaway I hope that you have from this presentation today. This page is actually geared towards kids because we're trying to get kids to come to us, and this is all of our Department of Labor and Regulation services geared towards youth, and we're calling that all Career Launch because if I call it the Department of Labor and Regulation, Workforce Investment Act and Innovation, WIOA, Youth in School and Out of School Program, nobody is even going to listen until I'm at the end of that sentence, and it's going to sound very bureaucratic and governmental. And so instead, we went with a marketing campaign, the Career Launch name and logo, and trying to reach out to kids to get them interested. And I'll tell you, kids are hard to reach. So that's part of our efforts. But the second part of our efforts, and this is the biggest takeaway for you today, I'm throwing a lot of information out in a short time, but if you note this URL and you're wanting a concrete takeaway, okay, how can I do all these things that she's alluding to? Go to this page. You can see it's short and sweet and all information that you can easily provide. And if you click on submit, what that does is it's going to generate a personal contact from one of our reps in one of our offices, and they're going to start the conversation with you about how your business can engage with kids, how they can make that connection, and then our role is to facilitate that connection and make that actually happen. So for any of those things, if you're interested in job shadowing or on-the-job training or anything else that you can see there, you can access that site on our webpage. So again, I'll just give you a second. It's that careerlaunchsd.com, and I encourage all of you, if you're interested in these programs, to fill that out and submit it today. And then if you don't hear from somebody personally, you let me know and we'll make sure that happens. So how are we promoting all of this? We're doing traditional media, some print, and again, remember our target audience was youth, but also businesses because we need both sides of the equation. And just a sample of one of our posts on social media, and we've got a YouTube video, and we're very active on Facebook. So this is just one way, and you can see become a Career Launch South Dakota business partner, help young workers find success, but it's also a great way to build your workforce, and that's what we're interested in helping you do today. Some of the things that we've done already, it's really important that kids know about the opportunities in South Dakota. I've talked a lot about retaining youth and how we train youth in this presentation, and I will tell you it's so much easier to hold on to an individual than it is to recruit somebody to South Dakota that has no experience. And that's why I think it's well worth all of our time to make sure that we're doing everything we can to let kids know about the opportunities, how do they get there, what work-based learning opportunities can they take part in, and then make sure their education is relevant. So that's kind of a basic premise behind Career Launch. Because when kids do that, they know a lot more about their abilities and interests, they're more likely to be engaged, they start out on better footing. So what have we done so far in just that one semester? We have placed over 100 students in internships. We've had job opportunities for 30 more. We've had 100 classroom presentations, soft skills, resume building, and mock interviews. And these are things that businesses can actually take part in. And we've provided one-on-one career advising services to over 350 students. So again, these are connections that we've made through Career Launch directly from businesses to students in just one semester. And when you click on that link and fill out that sheet, that's what allows you to become a part of our efforts in this coming school year. Here are just some more examples of things that we've done in the past year. And then most importantly, what are the kids saying about it? Why are those work-based experiences in any form so important? And the middle one to me is one of the most, seems contradictory, but it is very important. Made me realize that it is not the job for me. So if a kid finds that out before they invest in a couple of years of college, much better to find that out during a 6-week work experience in high school than to invest time and energy in education in a job that's not going to be right for them. So these are, again, actual comments from students that have been taking part in Career Launch in this last school semester. One other thing I want to touch on, because there's huge interest and a lot of energy going behind this right now and a lot of awareness, is our Start Today SD campaign. And this is our apprenticeship program, and we have a youth focus, we have an adult focus, and we launched this campaign just in January. This is really interesting to me that we've had 474 students say, I want to learn more about an apprenticeship opportunity. And we're growing our business numbers. We've had 50 businesses. But we need to now be able to say to those 474 students, okay, we can connect you with a business. So since we don't have as much business interest as we have student interest, what we're doing right now is all of those kids, when we reach out to them and say, okay, we may not have an apprenticeship opportunity for you right now, but business A is willing to work with you in this manner, or business B has this opportunity for you. So we're not just closing the door on them, that we're finding other opportunities. So again, that's another reason why it's so important for you as a business to let us know that you're interested, so we can help facilitate those connections. And these are just kids that indicated an interest in an apprenticeship. I mean, there aren't a lot more interested in work-based learning. Too much information to cover in one webinar, but we also have a grant announcement that's going out today for businesses that are wishing to start an apprenticeship. And this is actually a financial incentive to businesses. If you want to start a new apprenticeship, you can receive up to $30,000 to get that apprenticeship started. And we hope with this to bring more businesses to the table and expand apprenticeships to areas where maybe they've not been traditionally done, that people are able to earn and learn at the same time in all industry sectors, not just the building trades or not just construction, but in many other occupations within our state. So to kind of summarize all of that, we really do have great opportunities in South Dakota. It's our responsibility to make sure that students and parents and educators and businesses are all working together to let students know about these opportunities. And our goal with all the career advising and business involvement is to help those youth make better decisions. You know, think about a college education, be it a technical school or a four-year program. It is probably one of the biggest investments that anybody is going to make in their adult life. And yet I think sometimes we spend the least amount of time thinking about that investment and what I really want to be when I grow up and what path do I really want to take and how do I get there? Are there different, you know, can I go into the military? Can I go into an apprenticeship? Can I go to technical school and then on to a university? What are all those paths that are ultimately going to get me to my goal? And then, are there opportunities at the end of that tunnel? I think it's a huge disservice. We need all sorts of education. We need dreamers and we need scientists, but that parents and students need to make those choices in an informed way. I use my own son as an example. Went to school to be a philosopher, and there's not a great job market for philosophers, so that probably wasn't the best choice for him. I think he's actually interrupted me twice trying to call me during this webinar, if you've heard my phone ring. And he's back in school working on his business degree now. So how can we help individuals up front make those informed career decisions, and at the same time they're contributing to your workforce needs? They're showing up for you every day. They're helping you have the employees that you need to deliver the services that you need to deliver, to create the products that you need to create, that they're great contributing team members, but they're also working towards their futures at the same time. So with that, I think we're getting really close to the end. And Katie, I don't know if you wanted to ask any questions or if there were any questions submitted while I've been visiting.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll just thank you for the wealth of information. That was a great presentation. And we have had a couple of questions come in, so I'll just kind of start at the top. You talked about the unemployment rates in the beginning of the presentation. Do those unemployment rates only show those that are actually collecting the unemployment benefits? Those numbers?
No, those are different numbers because not everybody that meets that definition of unemployed, seeking work actively in the last 4 weeks, available for work, no job, that doesn't mean I qualify for unemployment. So there's, you know, I would have to have enough wages in my previous quarter. I would have to have been let go for no fault of my own. So, you know, all those conditions to receive unemployment don't necessarily apply to everybody in that number.
Okay. The next few questions are about the apprenticeships. Do you think the apprenticeship business interest is low because of all of everything that's required with paperwork and stuff? Or what do you think is the reason for the interest being low?
I think that is exactly part of the problem. One, apprenticeships as they exist today is kind of a new concept, and we have that maybe old model in mind. And two, it hasn't been easy in the past to do the paperwork, to get the standards and related education in place that are required to do an apprenticeship. And that's why we're taking such an active role. Our goal is to take the headache out of it for businesses, and we're not there yet. But we're working that direction, and actually the president just released a new model for apprenticeships that will allow more state control and more state approval. So we're hoping that greatly simplifies the process too. So that's why we're doing the incentive grant. We're hoping that there are employers that were just kind of teetering, thinking about doing it, and they're like, oh, I just don't know if it's worth the headache, by offering them a bit of a financial incentive that they'll take that plunge and bear with us. It will be a process, but in the long run, it's a process that's worth it.
Very good. What about for retail specific businesses? Are there internships and apprenticeship programs for, are retail businesses eligible?
Yes, definitely. And think about retail, all the different skills that a student is going to learn, especially when we're talking about those soft skills that everyone needs. I think retail is a great place to learn those, but there's also ways to advance in retail and many different types of occupations that are covered within that realm. So yes, definitely they're appropriate for our on-the-job training funding. They're appropriate, and there are actually standards developed in other states for retail and tourism sectors that you can do a registered apprenticeship in as well. We haven't done them yet in the state, but that doesn't mean we can't.
Perfect. How much input from youth was provided in the development of the Here's How You Reach Us program?
That's an awesome question, and it's my soapbox. I think we have a tendency as adults to sit around and talk about youth all day and how to reach them and where they're at and how do we connect with them, and we never invite youth to the table. So we, not for this particular marketing, but in the past, we do reach out to youth and do focus groups. And our marketing firm that we worked with on this particular endeavor is not specific to this project, but to marketing youth in general, have done a lot of research in that area. But yeah, I need to practice what I preach and make sure that we are sitting down with youth and doing that very thing.
Okay, so the Build South Dakota partnership opportunity, could that be added to that career launch page for businesses to learn more about the process, the costs, and everything?
Definitely, to make that another box right on there that if I'm interested in the Build Dakota scholarship. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. And I know that my coworker, Dawn Dovry, is listening, and she'll make note of that so we can visit about doing that.
And I think maybe you touched on this, but can you kind of elaborate on what you've been doing with the schools and how you're engaging them, or like different boards, the Student Activities Board, and are you engaging at a state level or a local level? Or, is there any local engagement?
Yes.
Or
in those pilot communities that I mentioned, so in Yankton, Brookings, Watertown, and Rapid City, Sioux Falls, we have very direct, we have career advisors, and the whole goal for those career advisors in those communities is to be that one place, because we hear from businesses all the time, I want to connect with students, how do I do it? What's that one point of contact? And so we've got those individuals embedded in the Department of Labor, and they're actually funded by the Department of Education and Labor, and their role is to connect businesses with students and vice versa. So within those communities, they're actively engaged with the schools, with the principals, with the superintendents, with the business community, just at every level. And so now our goal, that was our pilot that we started last January, and now we're expanding that to more communities this coming fall.
That's great. I just have a couple of questions left. So if you still have a question, and you want to ask it, you go up to the panel on the side of your screen, and then you may need to click on that orange arrow to maximize the panel, but you just click on the questions box and type in your question and press answer or send, and then I can ask the question. But I just have a couple more that have come in right now, and I do know you covered this, but someone jumped on late, and I think it was a great thing. Well, maybe, could you talk about the soft skills training, that 8-hour training that DLR does?
Yes.
For employers?
So the training is called Bring Your A Game, and to keep it short and sweet, contact your local office. It's available for a brand new employee. It's available for existing employees. It's an 8-hour training that we can design, that 8-hour block into different blocks of time if that works better for you. We have decided that labor will pay for the cost of the training if an employer will pay for the individual's wages while they're there. So send new employees, existing employees, and it covers those soft skills. And then we work with individuals that are still in the job market, and we put them all through that training as well. And we encourage employers to take part. If you're a business owner and want to go to the training to see if it's worth your employees' time, please, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, that is such a great opportunity, I think. So the last question, kind of a two-part question that I have, is about youth working. So has there been a requirement, an age requirement change for youth working in manufacturing? And then on top of that, can you talk about youth, and are they allowed to operate heavy equipment?
Okay. And we do operate in South Dakota under federal youth labor laws. And I will tell you, there haven't been any changes recently. There is some flexibility that people were unaware of, that if a youth is involved in a registered apprenticeship or a school-based learning, they can actually be engaged in hazardous occupations. But I would encourage you, Tom Hart from our office did a previous webinar with retailers on youth labor laws, and I think that would be a really worthwhile webinar for people to go back and review to get really specific answers on those youth labor law questions.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And we will send out a recording of this webinar later today after it's processed, and we'll include a link to Tom's presentation from a couple months ago on the youth labor laws. So you'll have both of them, or you can check out our website at www.sdra.org and check out our webinar recordings, and it's also there. So I think that's all the questions that I have had come in.
And if I may, I just wanted one more closing bit of advice. So if you hire a kid and it's really working out well, don't underestimate the power of reaching out to their circle. You might think it's a bad idea, but who are their friends? Would any of their friends be interested in working with you? What kind of teams are they on, or groups are they in, or bands do they participate with? And reach out to that social circle, family. It's all really grassroots, but sometimes that's where you're going to have your best success. 4-H, FFA, any of those groups that our kids are involved in are really good recruitment strategies for a business to reach out to those groups. And it also requires you to know a little bit about the kids that you're hiring. So I think that's just a good foundation for knowing a little bit more about our employees, and then using that as a recruitment tool if they're having a good experience with you.
All right. Thank you so much today, Secretary Hultman, for this great presentation. I think it was very, very packed with information. As I said before, this webinar was recorded, and a link to the recording and then to the youth labor law recording will be emailed out to you later today. One thing before we conclude today, I'd like to let you know about a couple more educational opportunities. On September 18th, we are going to be partnering with South Dakota's Labor Market Information Center to host a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics webinar on how to find statistics on labor issues and demographics, and how you can use that information in your business. And then in October, we're teaming up with the South Dakota Department of Revenue to present a webinar specifically for South Dakota's grocery stores. So you can find information on those and registration links on our website, again, www.sdra.org. And we will include that registration link in the email with a recording of this webinar. So thank you for everyone for participating in today's program, and thanks again to Secretary Marcia Hultman from the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation.